Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Holden's 11. I got a terrific guest tonight, and I can't wait to talk to him. Please welcome creator Rodney Fyke.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, welcome, Rodney. I'm really looking forward to talking to you.
Excellent. Me too.
We have a terrific topic tonight, and this is one I know that you and I are both passionate about. Tonight's topic, this is the top 11 UFO sightings. And man, there's just some great ones, right? And it's always difficult to make these lists. And we always operate kind of by a set of rules. And in this case, this is what you and I would call modern UFO sightings, because as you know, if you start going through the list, you can go back into the, to almost, biblical times.
Absolutely.
So we're going to start in what I would term the modern era. Okay. And I'm going to launch right into it with our number 11. This is the Kenneth Arnold sighting from 1947. And this one to me is kind of important because it's really where we get the term flying saucer.
Yeah. He observed them skipping along. And that's what he said. He said it's as if when he went back to explain the term, he said, as if you were to skip a rock on the surface of the water. And that's what it did.
Yeah. And by the way, he was a pilot also, right?
And
some of the people that we're going to talk about, and, there's always a propensity to dismiss some of these sightings as, well, that's a hoax, or this fellow was a kook. And you and I are going to talk about that too, like what we thought. And what I would say about Kenneth Arnold, here's definitely a guy who had nothing to gain by making up a story. And
he had everything to lose.
Right. Well said.
Yeah.
And when you talk about these people that are pilots, and several of these on our list are going to be pilots and Air Force personnel and airport personnel. They're people that are trained to recognize what you and I would say were aerial phenomenon. So the fact that they didn't recognize it, it's all the scarier, right?
Oh yeah. And that's the part that always irks me, is when you have the naysayers and the skeptics immediately jump in and say, oh, it was swamp gas, or it was a weather balloon.
Yeah, the reflection of Venus.
Yeah, I just feel like those are people that are employed by government agencies to debunk everything.
Right. And by the way, we're going to talk about that too. I guess from some of the viewers that have watched this show, you might already know I have kind of what they call a deep distrust of the government.
Yeah, and you and me both.
Yeah, and by the way, we're both pretty normal guys, you and I. We're not necessarily kooks in any traditional sense of the word.
No, not at all.
But it would be fair to say, and I'm a little older than you, but we've caught the government lying a number of times.
Time and time again.
Yeah, and I always tell my, I got, I have a 26-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son, and I try to point out to them, look, and by the way, we're not to get too far off the list, but you got this stuff going on now. You got this mushroom cloud over Ohio, right?
You know what I would, and this might ruffle some feathers, but that's why we do this.
Yeah.
If you want to question whether or not the U.S. government lies, just go ask any Native American how they feel about that.
Right. Exactly, man. Exactly. And it's not like, well, it was only the one time. I mean, if you go back, and even like, I also love conspiracy theories, and we're going to chat about that a little, but like the ones from the 50s and 60s that sounded so crazy, of course, we found out in the 80s and 90s that many of those were true.
Right. And we'll find out in 30 years from now that the stuff that we're seeing in the skies, okay, well, they're going to be the state-of-the-art aircraft, debuting in whatever war there is in 30 years.
Right. The nano drone war, which is probably coming.
Yeah, the AI wars.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, so Kenneth Arnold was a great place to start the list, because to my mind, he was kind of the birthplace of the modern flying saucer UFO sighting. I'm going to jump forward a couple of years here. This is our number 10, the McMinnville UFO photographs. This is from May 11th, 1950. It's in McMinnville, Oregon. Are you familiar with this one?
Somewhat. I tried to read up on it the other night and really couldn't find a whole lot, other than they were the quintessential they're considered the quintessential photos
that
haven't been documented.
Right.
It's confirmed they haven't been documented.
Yeah, and let's be honest, this one went back and forth, and
Yeah.
some people claimed it was a hoax, and some people, they had photographic scientists analyze the sight lines and the light and this and that, and of course, they were unable to duplicate it. Remember, we're talking about 1950.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and the reason why this one sticks out in my mind, you're talking about these folks. It was Paul and Evelyn Trent. They were farm folk, right? Mm-hmm. Again, not really the type of people that would say, let's fake this.
And yeah. And that's the thing with me, when you stop and you think about when these things occur, the first thing any official agency tries to do is discredit the eyewitnesses. So my initial question concerning those folks, the eyewitnesses, are motive. Do they have a motive?
Yeah.
They already know they're going to be ridiculed and anything else that goes along with saying, hey, I saw a UFO above my house or my farm. Why would they open themselves up for that? Unless they're just attention whores.
Right.
And most of these people don't seem like that.
They don't seem like that, exactly. And there's one or two on the list that might be, and we'll get into that. But to my mind, these people were just farmers that sort of accidentally caught this. And I think it's like 3 or 4 photographs. But there's one or two where you see it and you're like, oh my gosh, what the heck is that in the sky, right? And we've seen UFOs come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but this is probably what the most people would consider a classic UFO sighting.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, when I look at the photos, I immediately go to, I used to be really big into miniatures and models and stuff, and how Lucasfilm did all the ships for Star Wars and all that. Right, so my mind immediately goes, okay, is that a inverted hubcap, or is that an interior spindle to this or that they've put together? That's how my mind tries to deconstruct it visually.
Right.
But they've had 70 years to try to deconstruct that, and nobody can.
Right.
Those photos.
Right. And also in this case, both of the it was a husband and wife, both of them have since passed, and to their deathbeds they said, hey, this was something I saw. They didn't because sometimes people get right to the end, they go, hey man, I got to let you in on a little secret. I was trying to get on the front page of the paper, right?
Gotcha.
But in this case, and by the way, they weren't necessarily in the interviews, they don't ever say anything like, I saw people from space. It isn't that at all. They were like, what the heck's that? They didn't know what it was. And, I guess at the time there was a little bit, they thought it might've been like a war weapon or something. Right. I don't think anybody ever said they were UFOs. It wasn't that common of a term yet. But of course, people like you and I started looking into it and saying,
and that's something else to consider, which I've never considered until this point that you and I are talking about this. But back in the 50s, and it still exists today, the maintaining this constant state of fear. Back then it was the Russians. Mm-hmm. So anything that you saw in the air, you immediately thought it was Russian technology.
Right.
And you just coming out of the droves of World War II, you're less than 10 years removed from that. So most adults lived through that, and it still scared them anytime they saw funky lights in the sky. Yeah. So they're dealing with that aspect of it too. They don't want it to be what they think it is.
Yeah.
So
it's a good point. That's a good point. And in those days too, it's very easy to forget today but fear of the Russians in an atomic war was a very real thing. They were only 5 years after the first atomic bomb, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was palpable in the nation. I mean, it launched a genre, in Hollywood, sci-fi movies.
Sure. And actually, to my mind, the best sci-fi movies.
Yes.
So with that in mind, we'll move into our number 9. And, when I was putting this list together, I didn't want to focus too much on abductions because I know these are hotly debated, but there's some of them that are so classic and such an integral part of UFO lore that I felt like we had to at least chat about it. So this brings us to our number 9, the Betty and Barney Hill abduction. And this is another one that, to me, we'll go over a couple of the details for the viewers, but these are people that didn't have anything to gain by claiming that they were abducted by UFOs.
No.
Yeah, just a weird case, right?
Oh, it's so bizarre because I just saw, I watch Ancient Aliens every Friday, so a lot of times
great show.
Yeah. they cover this stuff. As it turns out, her sister and a couple of different aunts were abducted too.
Oh, no kidding.
So they're theorizing, one of the theories is that the aliens come and they abduct lines of
right.
people
I've
through their
heard,
generations.
I've
Yeah.
heard this theory. Yeah. And it's,
Yeah.
you know, depending how crazy you want to get, it's DNA harvesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the thing that stuck with me, and by the way, I saw there was a movie based on this. I think it was a TV movie, and I forget what it was called, but I'll try and put it in the comments. And as I recall, it might even have been James Earl Jones played Barney Hill. But the gist of it was they were put under hypnosis to recall some of what had happened to them. And yeah, and they had sort of like these dramatic reactions under hypnosis because it all came flooding back, right? And
okay, I'm going to Google it real quick because
yeah,
I gotta...
and it was very disturbing to my young mind when I saw this. And two things stuck with me. Number one, you know, they were one of the first peoples to describe being probed.
Yes.
Right. And there was some tests that were done to them. And again, one of the things, like, why would you make up that element? Because it was very humiliating for them to go over that. And the second thing, Barney Hill drew a map of the star system. And here's a guy who had no science or astronomical background. And he drew a map of the Zeta Reticuli system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
So there, you know, there's something to it, right?
Oh yeah. And the interesting thing is they're throughout the world, in different sightings and different interactions with them. They're either from the Pleiades or what was the name of the one you just said?
The Zeta Reticuli.
The Zeta Reticuli, or the Pleiades, or any number of systems. And it's just interesting. It's like, but it's called the UFO incident.
Yes.
From 1975.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was it James Earl Jones?
James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons as Betty Hill.
Yeah, interesting, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, as a sort of an interesting aside, this was 1961 was when the incident occurred, and the Hills were an interracial couple, which very progressive for the time.
Yeah, so they weren't looking for attention,
right?
In any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, people trying to stay out of the limelight, and they were also very traumatized by their experience. It wasn't like, hey, it was cool. We were like, allegedly, like when they put her under hypnosis, because she didn't remember most of hers. They sort of had a block of missing time.
Yeah,
and when they put her under hypnosis, she like burst into tears and was very. Like they felt like they were violated, I guess is a good way to put it.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember if she was one of the females that remember them harvesting eggs.
I don't recall that. The book,
yeah.
I made a note here. The book is called The Interrupted Journey, if you'd like to check that out.
Okay.
But I love all kinds of UFO lore. I know you do also. And this is one of just the quintessential cases, and probably one of the first ones to get media attention.
Yes.
As we talk about media attention, some of these have a lot of attention, and the government tries to sort of play them down. And this is why I want to talk about this next one. This is our number 8. It's the USS Nimitz incident, and it's sometimes called the Pentagon UFO videos. And what they have here is a very compelling sequence of videos that were witnessed by a ton of servicemen aboard the USS Nimitz. This is in 2004 this happened. Mm-hmm. There have been a couple since then, but 2004 was the big one. So definitely a more modern sighting, and definitely a situation where the government sort of downplayed the sighting.
Well, the interesting thing for me in that is that time has passed. Technology has changed so much in the last 20 years with the internet.
Right.
And everybody's got a high def camera on their phone, and for that really didn't exist. But now, so people with information and stuff like that, I think the government's kind of trying to get a little bit ahead of that, because they have no idea what people have,
right?
That might want to come to the forefront with it. But the cool thing about these particular sightings is the aircraft that tilts
right
on its axis. I find that interesting because Bob Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell.
Man, yeah, Bob Lazar. I'm a huge fan of that story.
They were on Joe Rogan a couple years ago, and I've watched that podcast 3 times, and it's 3.5 hours of this stuff, so it's just amazing. Bob talks about the propulsion systems in those ships, and he said we have 9 ships of alien origin, and I believe he said they're all different. But they rise and they tilt on their axis, and they travel. The element 115 causes a distortion in space,
right?
And they basically slide through time.
They bend gravity, right?
Yeah.
And I might have this wrong, so if I get it wrong, viewers correct me, but it's non-ballistic motion, I think they call it. Like, it almost looks impossible the way it's moving.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Yeah, they're basically just, through lack of friction, they're sliding through space and time, or whatever they're doing, and I'm like, that's interesting.
And by the way, thanks for bringing up Bob Lazar, because I didn't necessarily put him on the list because it's not necessarily a sighting, like he was exposed to the craft and so forth.
Right.
But definitely one of those guys who was sort of being dismissed as a kook. Yeah. But then you hear his story and you go, wait a minute. Like, the guy's extremely intelligent. He's a propulsion engineer, and like, his story's very compelling and weird.
Yeah, and everything that he talked about 25 years ago have come to pass, as far as what the military has divulged, what our technology is now. So,
and I guess
he was telling the truth.
Wasn't Bob Lazar one of the first Area 51 guys? I guess it's Groom Lake now, but
yeah.
I was fascinated by that story. He turns up in all the UFO books.
Another cool thing about that whole incident is you assume that everything's going on at the base or underground, underneath the base, but it's an area called S4, which is 4 or 5 miles south of Groom Lake, in a mountain.
Right.
And it's camouflaged to look like the mountain, and you can't see it. There's particular ways to get in and out, but all of that stuff that's going on is inside that mountain. In the base, there's a base inside the mountain.
Fascinating.
Which just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's tough to wrap your head around some of this stuff. And and I don't want to veer too far off the list, but Bob Lazar had another quote, and I'm probably going to mess it up a little, but the gist of what he said was that the aliens had relayed some information about why religion was formed. And this was super controversial at the time. And Bob said something to the effect of, look, I don't even believe it. He said, there's no way it's true. He said, I don't even want to say this in my interview. And like, well, please tell us at least what they said. And he said, well, that the gist of it was that human beings have like an internal essence, which is what we call the soul. And that human beings kept making wars and things, and they were damaging the containers that held the souls. In other words, killing each other. Right. So aliens came up with the concept of religion to keep each other from damaging the containers.
Huh.
And he even said, look, I don't believe it. But the thing is, you think about it, it's like, whoa, that is heavy, man. Basically, it undermines much of what you and I would think about religion.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's in his interview. That's he did a couple of BBC interviews, and that line doesn't get a lot of press because he even says, well, I don't really believe this. He admits that a lot of this is misinformation. But whether that one is or not, it's still a fascinating concept to discuss,
Well, I'll be going and listening to those BBC interviews tomorrow.
Yeah. And, just a great character. And thanks for bringing that up, Rodney.
Oh, you're welcome. We can't have a UFO discussion without at least mentioning
Bob Lazar. Sure, exactly. As we move on into our next one, I'm fascinated by what they call the mass sightings. And I wanted to have at least one of these on the list. This one is our number 7. It's from October 27th, 1954. It's called the Florentina Stadium mass sighting. And this one's in Florence, Italy, okay? And it was a football game, as I recall, and they stopped the game. There was over 10,000 people watching it as this silver egg descended out of the sky. And, the ref calls the game, they stop the game, and everybody stood there in silence watching this thing come down. And then it sort of, it started dissipating what they called like a glitter-like material. And like when it touched your body, it was like a spider web, sort of like it would dissipate right away. And you just have to ask yourself, what can you say about 10,000 people all seeing it at once?
Mass hallucination.
Right. It's the shadow of Venus on the ionosphere.
Yeah, exactly. So that's curious, because there were many reports, uh, like in the 1700s and the 1500s, of these cigar-shaped crafts coming out of the sky, appearing in the sky, and emitting a black mist
Right.
in areas of Europe right before the plague hit.
Ah.
So my question to you is, was there some type of a pandemic or something in Italy soon after that? There were people complaining of abnormalities or something?
Let's take a look at that. That's a
Yeah.
great theory. I hadn't even considered that. And I am somewhat fascinated by, I think, backing up what you said, Rodney, you can make a pretty good point that at certain points in history, there's been these UFO flaps that were potentially altering the course of human history.
Well, yeah, it even goes back to George Washington during the Revolutionary War. Many of his generals and underlings talked about how many times he would walk off into the woods and speak to a glowing green figure.
What? Okay, I wasn't aware of that one.
Yes, it's on Ancient Aliens. I don't know what episode it is, but they talked about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams seeing the lights in the sky and everything during that time in Philadelphia, the late 1700s. But yeah, George Washington actually went and encountered a being that told him that his army would be victorious, and told him the history of the United States.
Fascinating. I wasn't
Yes.
aware of that one.
Yes.
Isn't that
If
something?
I can find out what episode it is, I will let you know, because I've got a bunch of them saved on my DVR.
That'd be great, man. That'd be great.
I watch those because I can listen to them while I'm drawing. I don't have to watch them.
Yeah, yeah. And I've been a fan of UFO stories ever since I was a little kid. And
Oh yeah, me too.
As you probably know, most of my writing, I guess at this point, I'm kind of what you'd call a science fiction writer, And again, I respect all kinds of creators, but all my books, I don't have any kind of necessarily heroes or anything. They're all
Right.
they're all science fiction stories.
Yeah, and as many. The funny thing is as much as I am into UFOs and all of this stuff, my books are usually comedies, and I just did, Roku Rampage was my first horror attempt.
Yeah.
And now we've got Doghouse, which is humor, and I did superheroes back in the 90s. A lot of that was wrapped around some science fiction, and what was, supposed to be if we would have kept on publishing Superior 7, a lot of the elements of what I wanted to do with UFOs and future technology stuff would have been woven in, but it never happened. But going forward, that's a hope that I can do that.
Well, I'm always super interested in hearing what people's influences were. And, I was debating if I was going to share this, but I'll share it with you because it's very tied into what we're saying. When I was probably 10 years old, my grandmother told me a story about the time she saw a flying saucer, and it was in her house, which I visited many times as a child. And what sticks with me the most is that my grandmother was not a kook. She was sharp as a tack, and she was extremely intelligent and very, she was on top of everything. She was that way right up till the day she died.
Right.
But when she tells the story, and she never told it to the paper or anything like that, but there was two things that stick in my mind. The first, she says, well, Timmy, she calls me. She says, Timmy, I'm sitting and I'm watching the curtains. They were drawn, and I saw the red lights flashing. And I said, well, there's a fire truck parked out in front of the house. And she said, and I walked to the curtains and I opened up the curtains and I looked up. There's a flying pie plate right over the telephone pole, which she was not familiar with the term flying saucer. She said it was a flying pie plate, which if you were going to describe a UFO to somebody that didn't know what a UFO was, you might say a pie plate. And she said, and I can still remember it like it's yesterday. She says, one had a light going this way and it was orange going around in a circle, and one had a light going the opposite direction and it was blue. And by the way, this is right over what you and I would call a transformer, which used to be on telephone poles. It's not there anymore, but in 1975 it was.
Right.
And she said, I stood there and I watched it. She said, I remember what time it was. It was just after 7 o'clock because the Dean Martin show was on. He's dead now, you know, Timmy. And I said, which the way somebody tells a story, right? And I said, well, yeah, sure, of course. And then she said, well, I called to Marge, come over and take a look at this. And she said, by the time Marge came to the window, the darn thing just shrank right in the sky. And when you say shrank, something zooming away at terrible velocity, right?
Yeah.
And you know, that story stuck with me because here was somebody with no science background, didn't watch sci-fi movies. She's an older lady that saw something weird.
You know, okay, I'll share a story since we're
Yeah,
my
please do.
mother told me this about 15 years ago. And it's right when I was kind of really getting more into this stuff. She said when she was a little girl, she said her and her sister used to sleep in the same bed together. They were 4 years apart. She was the oldest. And she said, I felt something in the room and I looked up and there were these two gray beings standing at the end of the bed.
What?
She said they didn't say anything. They just looked, and she said the one of them put his hand up like this. And she said, and we were just didn't know what to do because, you know, they didn't have a TV. You know, this was probably, she was born in 46. So this was probably 52 or 53. And she said they came like 4 or 5 different times when she was a little kid.
No way.
Yeah.
So again, it proves, well, it doesn't prove it, but it suggests the theory that people who are abducted, they claim to be getting visited multiple times.
Yeah.
In many of the cases, that's what you'd see.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great story, man.
Yeah, I think about it occasionally because some nights I'm a night owl, but I have to live in the day world, so we go to bed reasonably early. But when I've had a day of creating or a day of 10 hours of Ancient Aliens and my mind is just going crazy, and I'll lay in bed and it's almost like you can feel, I don't know if it's just your imagination going wild or if there's actually something there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've experienced that a few times myself. So I haven't seen anything.
Fascinating.
But yeah, it's fodder for story writing.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. And that's going to bring us to our next one. And what I'd like to hear, Rodney, is whether you think this is a hoax or not. And
Okay.
many people say it was, and it's been analyzed many different ways. This is our number 6, the Travis Walton abduction. This is from November 5th, 1975. It was made into a movie called Fire in the Sky.
Fire in the Sky, yeah, with D.B. Sweeney.
Yeah. And man, what a great movie. Very disturbing special effects.
Yeah.
And basically the gist of it is fella claims he was abducted from the woods, and he was gone something like 5 days and then turned up essentially out of his mind, traumatized. Now, here's the tough thing for Travis Walton. Some people would say something like, well, by now you've already had the Betty and Barney Hill abduction. Maybe he was trying to get on the front page of the paper. And he did get on the front page of probably every paper in the country. What do you make of this, Rodney?
I believe him. And again, I'll go back to a Joe Rogan interview. He was on Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
And he talked about it. And he, same thing we've been saying all night. What motive would I have had? I was out there logging. I'm trying to make money.
Right.
I didn't have time to be gone for 5 days and miss 5 days of pay. We were lucky to have the work that we got.
Right.
So, and to hear him talk about it, it's some people you just believe. And he's one of the ones that I just believe. The details are
there's a couple of weird details, right? Like one is, and again, viewers, if I got this a little wrong, correct me in the comments, but he was in a truck with, I think, 3 or 4 of his logging buddies, and they saw this kind of weird object, right? And they stopped the truck, and Travis got out of the truck and like ran up to it. And the buddies were like, F this, I'm getting out of here. Like they bailed, which first off, that's definitely what a bunch of scared dudes would do. But where I'm going with it is, there's too many ways, like they all would have had to get their story together ahead of time and afterward. Like there's too many ways. Remember, they reported him missing because they didn't know what the hell they just saw.
Yeah, because they were all accused of murdering him.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
They were hauled in by the cops.
Yeah.
And that definitely makes you go, now why would they have done that if it was fake, right?
And here's an interesting point about that. And I had never heard this until I saw the interview on Rogan. He said that because Joe asked him, well, why did you even get out of the truck? And he said, I was pulled out of the truck.
He felt
There was there was something that compelled him to come to the light.
Exactly. Because
Yeah.
that's a great way to put it, because everybody else was terrified out of their mind and they were going, get back here. And he just like walked up, and do I have it right? Then a beam hit him and then he was gone and the ship was gone.
Teleported up. Yeah. So for me, I like to dissect it a little more. There had to have been something about him. So he's just more open-minded, more advanced in his thinking and his processing of information. And I mean this in the best possible light. He wasn't, he was more intelligent than the other guys he was with. I don't know why was he picked out of the 4 guys that were there.
Hey, something in the DNA, maybe. One of the theories that we sometimes talk about is that what you and I would call an alien gray, they're tampering or altering the DNA of certain humans in an effort to create an evolutionary jumpstart. And yes, I know how crazy that sounds, what I just said, but
not to me.
I got the right guy, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe in that kind of stuff. And it's like you say, even if you go back to, throughout history, there have been what they call evolutionary jump starts.
Yep.
And in most cases, they can't quite tell what caused it.
Are you familiar with the Anunnaki at all?
I recognize the word. Tell me a little more.
The Anunnaki, this is all, do you know who Zecharia Sitchin is?
Mm-mm.
He is the gentleman who, after 30 years of studying the ancient Sumerian cuneiform, finally deciphered it. Based on those tablets that he read, the Anunnaki were a race of aliens that came to the planets because their atmosphere, they had damaged their atmosphere with all of their technology on their planet, and they came to Earth to mine the gold. When they found out how labor intensive, when they realized how labor intensive and everything was going to take time and yada yada yada, they took the existing indigenous species on the planet and they engineered them to be basically worker bees to mine the gold for them, so they could get back to whatever planet they're supposed to be from, which is Nibiru, which was supposed to be the 10th planet in our solar system.
Planet X. Yeah.
I
am a little bit familiar with it. And the idea behind it, they were saying that because at that time, humans, Homo sapiens, lacked the basic intelligence to do some of these tasks. So they sort of installed the intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And they ruled Sumerian, the whole area, from the Akkadians to the Babylonians to Sumer, all that entire area for thousands of years. We're talking 7,000 to 9,000 years BC.
That's amazing.
And they were 9 to 12 feet tall, and they kind of glowed. Yeah.
That's a great theory. Thanks for sharing that one, Rodney.
Yeah. Look them up. The Anunnaki, Annauki.
Yeah, I've heard about it a little bit, and I knew the Nibiru connection. I'm one of those guys where I heard a little bit about each thing, but I'm not real super knowledgeable about each one. Yeah. While we're on the subject of abductions and hoaxes, and like I say, I wanted to have some care to not make the list about abductions, but some of them are so prominent, right?
Yeah.
In culture. This brings us to our number 5, which is Whitley Strieber. You familiar with him?
Not a lot.
This is the guy. There was a movie based on it. It was called Communion, and it was one of my favorite actors. He's Christopher Walken.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And allegedly, the abduction happened it's December 26, 1985. And the thing that sticks with me in this one, now, here's when I say hoax. You've got a guy who's a novelist. Okay, so he wrote for a living, so already full of imagination.
I know who you're talking about. I know.
Yeah, and also he was caught in telling a false story once. I'll save that till the end. But basically what this guy said was, and I'll give you the premise of the movie Communion. If you haven't seen it, man, it's a super scary movie. Because what they did is they pulled the information out of him, again, with hypnosis. The people go to stay at their cabin in the woods, and in the night, they're all woken up by this tremendously bright light. Okay. And it's Whitley Strieber and his wife and son, and their two best friends from the city. I think they're from New York City. And they were in like upstate New York or something on this vacation. Well, when they wake up in the morning, the neighbors, the two friends, are scared out of their mind. They're like, look, we want to go home. We don't want to have a vacation anymore. And they're like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And like, don't you remember the bright light last night? And they're like, no, I don't remember any bright light. And they're like, we want to go. And they jump in the car and they drive off. Well, Whitley Strieber says something like, well, that's funny. I don't remember any light. But he said, remember that owl got in here last night? And everybody went, owl? What do you mean? There was no owl in here last night. And it took until it was under hypnosis, but basically a post-hypnotic suggestion had been installed into his mind to make him forget that he had in fact encountered these alien grays that did experiments on him. And there was no owl, but that's how you are now seeing an owl, like that.
Yeah.
And the story was extremely compelling and super weird. And then it turned out that he was one of these guys that had had multiple visitations.
Okay.
Again, allegedly, okay? And, out of all these on the list, I would say this one is the most likely to be a hoax. And I'll tell you why. This fella did something else that didn't come out till years later. He claimed that he was at the shooting, the campus shooting that Charles Whitman fella did in Texas.
Yeah, and the bell tower shooter.
Correct. And then it turned out many years later that Whitley Strieber was not actually at the shooting, and he was writing about it to get in the paper or something. So that immediately casts a pall of
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, potentially dubious claim. Yes. But the way that he described this alien abduction and the repeated abductions, and he swears to this day that it's all legit.
I went and most of the ones that you sent me on the list I was aware of, but I wasn't aware of him. And I went and I would look for him, and I found his podcast, and I started watching an episode. And this was late last night, and I had to get up this morning for the doctor. But he was talking to a lady about life beyond death. Yeah. So I wasn't sure, and I didn't have time to watch more, so I kind of left it at that. But yeah, that's all I was able to look up him for. So but I'll definitely look
if you
more
can.
into him.
Do you like Christopher Walken?
I love Christopher Walken.
I will tell you, and this is a bold statement because I love Christopher Walken. It's one of his best films.
Oh yeah, I've got it written down. I'll check it out.
It's called Communion, and listen, don't watch it on a night when you're by yourself, because it's very much about the power of hypnotic suggestion, and that something that's in your mind might actually have really happened to you. And it's full of stuff like that, and it definitely will. It's a little bit mind-bending.
Will mess with you.
Yeah, it's too scary for me to watch when I'm by myself, because, as you know, I tend to believe in this stuff anyway. So we'll move on to our number 4. This is one of my favorites. This is The Mystery of Flight 19 from 1945. And what we have here, this one could actually be on 2 lists, which if we ever make a list about the Bermuda Triangle, this could be one of those. But around the Florida at that time, there was a number of UFO sightings. Mm-hmm. But perhaps more interestingly, this squadron of planes went missing during it.
Yeah. I've seen so many shows on this incident. They found a wormhole somewhere.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily believe in the Bermuda Triangle, but there's a couple things stick out that are odd, right? And the first thing is it's 5 aircraft. Yeah. Which, look, the government tracks their aircraft, particularly if they're expensive. I wrote this down so we would know some more details. They were General Motors TBM Avengers torpedo bombers. Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about light aircraft or some cheap plane, right?
No.
And it was, I think, 14 servicemen. Yeah. And even the ones that went out after him.
I was going to say, the ones that went after him disappeared too.
Right. And so the whole thing is just weird. And one of my favorite things about it is this one is also featured in one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. You dig that movie?
You know, I just watched that for the first time last summer.
Nice.
I'd never seen it. And we were talking about it on a podcast. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go find it. So I found it at about midnight, and we were laying there watching TV, and Tina got about a half hour into it. She's like, I'm going to bed. You can watch it if you want.
Yeah.
And I could have pushed record, but I was hooked.
Yeah.
And I laid there and I watched the entire movie, and I was like, wow.
It has all the great elements of UFO lore. It's got the post-hypnotic suggestions. Like, remember, all the people, once they see a UFO, or once they have a close encounter, I guess I should say, they sort of see this mountain in their mind. And some people want to paint it, and some people want to sculpt it. But everybody, somehow they know they've got to get to this mountain. And the scientist at the end says it the best way. These people belong here. They were invited.
Yes. And the cool thing for me is, the guy from Ohio State was part of Project Blue Book.
Oh, Hynek?
Yeah, Hynek.
Yeah.
He was a technical advisor on that movie, and he was there when he's actually in the movie when they were shooting those scenes.
Right. Yeah, he's in the music session, right?
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, and again, viewers, correct me if I got this mixed up, but the character Claude Lacombe, the scientist of CE3K, is allegedly based on Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Like, it's the way that they worked him into the story. And by the way, some of Hynek's research is just as compelling today as it was back then. I mean, the way he analyzed the sightings and compiled them and the hypnotic suggestions, so much of it became true,
Right. Did you ever watch Project Blue Book on the History Channel?
I did, and man, what a great show.
I was crushed when they just left us hanging on season 2. They didn't
right.
They didn't renew it. I'm like, no, at least give us closure.
Right. I think I only saw the first one. And by the way, it's a remake, right? Like, there was one in the 70s. I watched that one too when I was a kid.
Okay.
And
I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, and basically what they do is the story of it varies a little bit show to show, but it's the 2 Air Force colonels who visit the people who've claimed to have a close encounter, and some turn out to be kind of factual and some turn out to be kind of hoaxes. And what they're trying to do is always prove that everything's a hoax, and then sometimes they can't. They kind of leave like, oh, this one seems kind of real.
They find out in a lot of instances that it's legit, but the government tells them what to write in their reports.
Right, exactly.
Yes. And a interesting note on that, at the end of season 2, can I spoiler alerts?
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
Okay, the younger guy, the Air Force pilot, that's Heineken's partner. What's his name? Heinlein?
It's Hynek.
Hynek. Okay, I keep wanting to say Heineken.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, he they get are getting signals from deep sea. So he goes in a deep sea vessel and he dives down, and he gets to like below depths that they thought he could get. And all of a sudden there's a big shake, and the submarine's shaking, and he disappears. And his last broadcast was, they couldn't tell what it was. And that was the end of season 2.
Huh.
But the interesting thing is, on one of the episodes of Ancient Aliens, they talk about prophetic people. And there was a girl who was somewhere over in Europe. She was blinded in a sandstorm when she was a child. And she was blind, and her eyes were all white, and she became a prophet, and everything that she prophesied came to pass. And she said that in 2135 we will have full contact with the aliens, but it won't be what we think, because they will come from the deep seas.
No
and not
way.
From outer space. Yeah.
That's pretty wild, man.
Yes.
That's exactly the kind of theory that I just love. And I also follow, I'd like to ask your opinion about this. There's also a theory that says aliens are not, in fact, extraterrestrial, but extra dimensional.
Yes.
The same way, and, I sometimes can't explain these scientific concepts very clearly. I'm a civilian. But the same way that a dog can't see in color, humans can only see in 3 dimensions, when in fact there could be many dimensions
Yes.
that are concurrent with ours that we just cannot see.
Yeah, and I don't say could be, I say are.
Yeah,
Because
because it's likely.
yeah, I believe that there is so much out there that we don't know. If you just stop and think about what the government has not told us, you know, there is so much that is undiscovered,
Right.
and that, you know, that it would blow our minds. So, you know, I understand them keeping it all you know, private, and obviously national security is always an issue. But you know, for a lot of people out there, Joey Bag of Donuts and the kids, they couldn't handle,
Right.
you know, what's really out there. And that's, I think, a lot of that. It makes sense why a lot of it's kept hush hush.
Sure. Potentially the collapse of civilization.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would agree with that. And we're going to get into a couple of the really freaky ones. I saved these for the end, and a couple of these are my favorites. Our number 3, this is from October 21st, 1978. This is an Australian fella. It's the disappearance of Frederick Valentich.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that's interesting about this one, again, it's a pilot, right? And he was piloting a Cessna, which is a light aircraft. And he starts radioing into the tower, which is Melbourne, I believe. And he's saying, hey, you know, do you have any traffic up here? I'm being followed by this object. And they radio back to him and they say something like, no, there's no, of course, it didn't show on radar either in this case.
Right.
And they said something effective, no, there's nothing out there. And he says, well, it's got these 4 bright lights and it's got this shining metallic surface. And they said, well, can you identify what type of aircraft it is? And the reply back is, it's not an aircraft. And then silence.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you make of that one?
This was last night. I was going over it, and it's the first time that I'd been made aware of it. And of course, the people that were called in to debunk it kept saying, "Oh, he was discombobulated. He was flying inverted, and this and that and the other." And if
I
you
heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah, if you go back and you listen to the transmissions from his plane back to the tower, he was in no way distressed. He was completely had his faculties about him. He knew where and when and what was going on, because he said, it just flew over my ship.
Right.
You know, so, you know, if you're looking up, you know, whether you're looking as if you're discombobulated, drunk, high, whatever, you look up, you know the difference between whether or not that is the sky or that is the ocean.
Right. And, you know, some of the explanations are just ridiculous, right? Like the one fella said, well, he was seeing the reflection of the moon. What? Like,
No.
what? Like even a civilian would know what the reflection of the moon looked like. And, you know, flying inverted, are you trying to tell us he was flying upside down and didn't know that? Like,
yeah, that's a hard pill to swallow. And weren't the lights green?
Yeah. Well, and of course he said it was a shining metallic surface, which the moon isn't metallic
at all. No,
none of the explanations add up.
So, at least the part that's covered with moon dust.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You know, but it's one of those things where, and of course, you know, that's an Australian one. They have lots of interesting UFO sightings down there. I wanted to make sure I put at least one Australian one on the list.
I'm glad you did, because I was completely unaware of that one.
That one's one of my favorites. Now, I know our next one, our number 2, this is one that you suggested, and this is one of my all-time favorites. So our number 2, it's from December 26th to 28th, 1980. So a little bit more modern. And it is sometimes called Britain's Roswell.
Yes.
It's number 2, the Rendlesham Forest incident. So can you tell us a little bit about that one?
The most, Rendlesham was a base, or is a base, that the U.S. basically leases from the British Empire.
Correct.
And there was a series of lights out on the edge of the forest that were reported on the base. So 2 men went out to investigate it, and I can't remember what the ranks were, but they went out and they saw these lights, and then they saw something on the ground, and they went out and they got out of their jeeps and they walked up, and it was an object. It was a ship.
Right.
And the most compelling thing for me is the one soldier put his hand on vessel. We'll call it a vessel, and he felt information transformed to him like a binary code.
Right.
So that, and the second thing is the hieroglyphs that he saw, that he jotted down in his notebook, because those hieroglyphs, and we'll get to that with number 1, were also prevalent in the Roswell wreckage.
Right. Exactly.
So the connectivity there,
Yeah.
35 years apart.
A very interesting case. And I'd like to mention that some of these, like we're talking about high-ranking Air Force personnel. But by the way, as you mentioned, this is not just British servicemen there were American servicemen there.
Yes.
And there was one or two small facts that stick out in my mind that are really interesting about this case. And one of them was that they said that there were American high-ranking servicemen there, officers, and they had notepads and they were jotting down the reactions of the servicemen that viewed the object. It's like, they were what? Like, why were they doing that? Like, you got a picture, you're seeing what could potentially be an alien craft.
Right.
It's just like everybody's going to be like sort of hypnotized, right? And they got another term from this, not too different from flying saucer. It's called the Oz factor. You ever hear of the Oz factor?
No.
But basically what it means is that when you see something unbelievable, no one says, wow, I'm seeing something unbelievable. They sort of freeze in their tracks because their mind's trying to process what they're seeing. And it's like when most people see a UFO, they don't say, hey, look, a UFO. They go, and they just like stare at it. They almost are sort of,
unrecognized technology.
yeah, like a WTF moment while they're just looking at the darn thing.
Oh yeah.
And so here's these guys that are American officers watching the reactions and making notes. Like,
see, what? I've never heard that.
Yeah, that part is in the there's a very famous document that accompanies this. It's called the HALT memo, the HALT memorandum, and it's
HAULT.
HALT, and it was the officer's name who was making these notes about what people saw. Yeah. And as you know, a lot of this was restricted because it was part of what you and I would call classified documents. And there's a great book that goes over all this. It's written by Timothy Good, and it's called Above Top Secret. And the whole book is nothing but declassified UFO documents that are released. I think it's after 25 years, they have to release it. And you read some of the stuff and it's just like, what? Like, it's almost unbelievable. And this is one of them that is in there. And is at this point, you can even look at it on Wikipedia and stuff. It's called the HALT memo, but it is part of the Rendlesham incident because it's his notes on what was happening. And you mentioned how they, had the information being transmitted by the craft. And the other thing was, there was like a thing where as they walked around the craft, one of the guys said something like time had slowed down a little bit.
Yeah.
Like as he was walking, his reflection was on the craft and like it wasn't quite keeping up with him in the same time as him. And I remember thinking, well, that's a weird one too.
Well, which also leads to me when I hear that, I think, is it in a different dimension or something until you reach out and make physical contact with it? Is it hovering between, dimensions? Why is that? Something's distorting that image on that metal surface.
Yeah. Or to go back to Bob Lazar, maybe we're seeing one of the after effects of gravity being bent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
potentially true, right? And like I say, it's a great pick, and I'm glad you suggested that one. And it's definitely one of my favorites because it's filled with weird tidbits of information that they don't necessarily go with UFO lore like you and I would say traditionally, but just odd elements. And even the fact of, the Americans are involved, the British are involved. It took place over 2 nights. The whole thing is just weird.
Okay, let me ask you this. Don't you think the industrialized nations, now let's put aside politics, let's put aside egos and everything, as a species, don't you think that they all are intelligent enough to realize that we are better served to work on this as a coalition and share information? I mean, I know that's ridiculous because, well, if we develop it, we'll have a better weapon than you will. But in their own best interest as surviving as a species, you think there's note sharing, or you think there's anything like that going on in between us and the Soviets and the Chinese and the Argentina and Peru, and people have no idea how much stuff's going on in South America. That's nuts.
Right.
Yes.
And by the way, there's one small flaw to our list, Rodney, which is I don't have anything from Mexico, which Mexico is one of the what's a good way to phrase this? They have numerous UFO sightings.
Hotspot.
Yeah, hotspot. And what you and I would call mass sightings as well.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing that is missing from our list. I didn't have a good Mexican one handy, but they even have the thing where, hovering over volcanoes, hovering over natural disasters, things like that. So, I think you're onto something, but there does seem to be, maybe this is the after effect of the Cold War. Like, based on what we're seeing for Rendlesham, there was a good amount of cooperation between the Brits and the United States.
Right.
When you talk about the Russians and stuff, it is definitely not the same case, right?
No. And now more so China.
Oh, right. Yeah. China is notoriously tight-lipped about this.
Everything. Yes.
Well, so without further delay, let's launch into our number one. This is the granddaddy of all UFO sightings. Of course, I'm talking about the summer of 1947, number one, the Roswell incident.
Yeah, my favorite.
Yeah, and probably mine too. And it would be fair to say that it is the granddaddy, right? It almost is almost simultaneously with our number 11, which was Kenneth Arnold, right? Both from 1947.
Yeah.
But, it's really the first. There's a couple of things to talk about here. It's a lot to unpack, as they say.
Couple of firsts.
Yeah, but I guess one of the most notable things, it was the first instance of the government noticeably interfering with an investigation.
Well, it's also the first instance where the government comes out initially and says, yeah, we've got a flying saucer.
Right.
Which I find mind-boggling because they're just off the heels of World War II.
Yeah.
They managed to construct nuclear bombs with the Manhattan Project. 50,000 people were involved in that process. Nobody said a word. And 2 years later, hey, look, we got a flying saucer.
Right, exactly.
It's interesting for me because Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is 60 miles from here. And we've been there several times. I've been to the Air and Space Museum a few times. I have friends who have family members who have worked there. One in particular was there. His great uncle was there when the plane brought the wreckage in. And he was tasked with guarding the individuals in Hangar 18.
Yeah.
And it scared the hell out of him. Right. As soon as he could get out of when his time was up, he got out and got away as fast as he could.
Right. And there's numerous conflicting reports. They're all troubling, right?
Yeah.
But isn't one of them that allegedly at the beginning, what they said was not only did they have the wreckage of the crashed UFO, but there's also a dead body, or maybe it was even two dead bodies.
3 dead bodies.
And wasn't there a survivor also at the beginning?
Yeah, there's 2 dead bodies and one alive.
Yeah, exactly. And again, if I got some of this wrong, viewer, please feel to correct me in the comments. But if I remember part of it, they were even saying one had some type of like a suit on, and they accidentally killed him removing the suit. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Something like that.
I don't know if you saw it last week. We were doing cartoons, and I've got a couple of little characters I call Ross and Will. And they're aliens, and they live at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Oh, so, nice.
I eventually will do more with them, but yeah, I did them for along the Burning River, which was an Ohio anthology of all Ohio creators.
I remember that one.
I did a little 4-page story, and Dr. Hynek. Okay, thank you. Yeah. He's in there, and it's funny. It's only 4 pages, but it's pretty hilarious.
Nice. Yeah, and I have in my new book, the alien abduction theory features pretty prominently as well. And I don't want to talk about that too much because we're going to be talking about your book here next. So the first thing I want to say is thanks for taking the time to make this list with me, Rodney. This is
absolutely
a really fun topic, and I literally could talk about this for hours. And I hope that some of our viewers will kind of chime in and see what they say, which ones are hoaxes and which aren't, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
But, I definitely wanted to talk to you about your upcoming project, which is going to be, by the time the video airs, it'll have just launched.
Yes.
What's your launch date?
Tomorrow night, Tuesday, February 21st, 8 p.m.
Okay, perfect. And can you tell us a little bit about first of all, tell us what it's called and how you were influenced to make it?
Okay, it's called Doghouse. That's Dawghaus, and it comes from just my goofy head. I have all these characters are talking to me constantly, and stories come to me through lines of dialogue in between characters. So I had this soliloquy going on about a particular subject which we cover early in the issue, and it was they were talking to me in my head, and I'm like, it's like I'm listening, like Robert E. Howard described, listening to Conan standing over his shoulder, dictating the stories. He simply wrote them down. That's what I do.
Nice.
And so I got this scene wrote down, and I read it to Tina, and she was like, "It's like, okay, so I got to create a book that's it's more. It's not dirty. It's ornery. It's I grew up with the Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry cartoons,
Sure, me too.
where
Me
there are
too.
different levels of humor. There's the adult humor and there's the child humor,
Right.
and the kids don't get the adult jokes. Okay, so that's what I wanted to do. After coming off of writing my horror arc with Roadkill Rampage,
Right. Which is
I
very
wanted,
well received, by the way.
yes, yes, thank you very much for saying that. But yeah,
Yep.
it is. And I wanted to kind of stay in the adult realm, but I wanted to do comedy, wanted to do humor.
Gotcha.
So, and to me, all the characters have that Brooklyn accent, Bugs Bunny, and because all those guys were guys from Brooklyn and New York that did all that stuff. So it's just the walk along, the other side of town. The city, it's a New Grouse City, and it's just south of the Tuna Tunnel.
Oh,
So
nice.
it's just our main characters are Scirocco and Rubs, our two homicide detectives, and they're called to the local bar to investigate the murder of its owner, Eddie. And their two prime suspects are Sinup, Eddie's longtime friend and bartender, and Fleeby, who is Eddie's side piece.
Nice.
So the story just centers around the last 48 hours of Eddie's life and them interviewing the folks in the bar and all the strange happenings and occurrences that have been going on in the bar. So, just kind of think Howard the Duck with mutts.
Oh man, it sounds cool.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a whodunit, and we've got all these local neighborhood folks in there. Otis the cat is particularly one of my favorites because he's just a dim-witted cat, and he's just kind of there. He's a barfly, and then it's fun how it all plays out. And when I was writing it, I hadn't really figured out the ending. I knew it was what was going to happen. I couldn't figure out how to make it happen, and it just happened. It's just when I'm not thinking of something, that's when it comes to me.
Right.
And
Yeah, I
when
get
I
that.
thought of it, I just started chuckling. And Tina will say, "They're talking to you, aren't they?" And I'll just say, "Yeah, I got to write this down."
Now, and in your case, you do a lot of the work yourself.
Yes,
So
yes.
on this book, you are
I am the writer and I am the colorist.
Gotcha.
Yes, and C. Michael Lanning does all the line work for us.
Gotcha.
He did a phenomenal job. It's a lot of fun if you like slapstick adult humor. And it's not lewd. There's no nudity in it. It's just a lot of sexual innuendo, just silly fun.
Gotcha. Well, it sounds like a lot of fun. And so the project's going to be launching Kickstarter. It'll by the time this video comes out, it'll have been out about 6 days.
Yes.
So, I would definitely recommend that people go and check it out. And where is the easiest place for people to find you as a creator?
They can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitch at Rodney Fyke Art. They can also find me over on the Indie Comics Network. I am there 3 nights a week. Monday nights at 3 p.m. or Monday afternoons at 3 p.m. I do a live draw show called Fyke It, Let's Draw.
Yeah.
And I draw from 3 to 4:30. On Thursday nights, we have Thursday Night Throwdown, which you have been on.
Yeah. Thanks so much, by the way.
Yes.
I had a terrific time on your show.
Yes.
I think it's really a lot of fun.
And you're more than welcome to come back whenever you'd like.
That'd be great, man. I'd love to because I'll have my book coming up here. I'll be trying to promote.
Absolutely.
Right
Just drop us a line and we'll bring you on. And then also we have a Sketchy Saturdays, which is every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. There's 5 of us that get on there and we talk. It usually ends up being a art lesson because we have John Celestri on there who was been in animation for over 50 years.
Oh,
So
okay.
he's kind of the grand poobah, and we have interaction with folks asking art questions and stuff like that. And there's 5 artists there, so there's 5 people giving information and tips and stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Well, that sounds amazing. I do want to ask you because I like to ask people this. Well, I got you in the interview chair, so to speak. Um, you strike me as a person that could do so many different things. Why comics?
I don't know. I've read comics since I was 4 years old, and I've just always had a passion for them. And I met a group. I had a group of friends in high school that we were brothers more than anything, and we created these characters, and we did them, in the '90s. And I loved superheroes, but as time went on, and everybody got married and moved away, and I still had a passion to do it. But I ended up we colored comics for a lot of people after the publishing kind of fell through because there was more money back then coloring comics. So we did that for about 7, 8 years,
Oh, okay.
and then I got out of it altogether and just got the day job. I blew my back out on my day job, and I was bedridden for a while. And it kind of forced me to, start drawing again. And at that time, that's when I met Tina, and we just got together and talked about things and life and what your plans were and what you wanted to do, what you could do, and we formed Hasm, and here we are, 12 years later.
Yeah, it's terrific, man. I enjoy following your works and your projects, and I
I
just wish
appreciate it.
I wish you all the success, man. I hope
Thank
the
you so much.
Kickstarter. I hope it's a big smash for you. I think it's going to do very well.
I hope so. I hope so. And thank you for the kind words. And I enjoy what you do. I need to get some of your books in, and I definitely want to check them out.
Well, I'm sure we can work together in the future. That's something like we were
Yes.
saying a little earlier backstage. I'm still sort of new, right? So I'm still kind of networking and meeting
Yeah.
nice people. And I appreciate that you guys were so welcoming with your show and everything. It's one of the shows I genuinely enjoyed doing, and I hope that in some way I can help people to promote their books with this show, and that's what we're
Oh,
trying to do.
absolutely. And that's, we're the same way. I personally have never met a stranger. I'm a people person. I love people. I love to make people laugh. I love to support people. I think in another life I could have been a teacher. And I just love entertainment,
Yeah.
whether, I always thought I could be a good voice actor.
Yeah.
Because I always do the cartoon voices and stuff. Yeah, I just love it. So we love interacting with folks, and it's just everybody's a little community. We all know each other, even though we live 1,000 miles apart or 500 miles apart, and we're just friends. So it's all of my friends are here, and that's who I communicate with, and it's my world, and I love it.
Well, in closing, I just want to say, Rodney, it's a terrific pleasure having you on the show. And I really had fun with this topic too, you can
Me
probably
too.
tell.
Me too. I'm so glad.
And man, I just wish you every success with your project. And I'm going to put the links below so the viewers will be able to check that out. And man, I tell you quite sincerely, I hope we can get together soon for the next one.
Absolutely. That would be great. I would love it.
All right, wonderful. Viewers, thanks again for tuning in. This has been an episode of Holden's 11. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Good night,
Bye.
everybody.